Everybody still okay? All right. Good. Don't let me trick you in like true falses by putting nitrous oxide instead of nitric oxide. Thank you very much. All right. What is nitrous oxide? Does anybody know what's nitrous oxide? Laughing gas. What is nitric oxide? That's very different. Nitric oxide is a small molecule that acts in a paracrine manner. And its biggest effect is vasodilation, right? Vasodilation means opening up.
Y'all go back in and they go.
We can just finish here.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. All right. Vasodilation means opening up the arterioles so more blood can go into the capillaries and perfuse the tissue with blood. We are going to stay here.
Okay.
Nobody's here. Everybody's okay?
Everybody's okay. She's coherent.
Everybody who wanted to leave has left. These are the toughies that wanted a review session. All right.
It's a day.
Thank you. All right. So nitric oxide opens up the blood vessels, for instance, in the lung. And the research, that was done on a drug that would open up the blood vessels in the lung for people who have, congestive, lung issues and whatnot. Well, that research did not lead to a drug that is actually very good at this. It can do it to some extent, but it doesn't do it really, really well. But what it found was a side effect. And that side effect led to this drug being the most profitable drug in history. This is Viagra, because it opens up the blood vessels in the penis. You all watch Grey's Anatomy?
Yes.
Yeah, 20th season, yes. Many, many years ago, many seasons ago, remember when Meredith and her boyfriend, what's his name? Were on an airplane with a lot of turbulence, and they had several injuries and sick people on there. And there was a guy who was like really mean and misbehaving and being really nasty to them and whatnot. And suddenly he clutched on his chest and whatnot. And so they asked, like, does anybody have Viagra, right? And there was this old lady, this is my husband's, and they gave him Viagra, and then opened up to some extent the blood vessels in his chest, in his lungs, and so he started breathing again. So it does have a partial effect on all the capillaries, all the arterioles, everywhere, but of course it was like working best on the penis. Okay, so don't be fooled if I put nitric or versus nitrous. Nitrous is laughing gas, nitric is...
Do you have a roster?
It's somewhere here, I do have a roster.
Did you actually have one?
I will find it,
Sorry.
somewhere in here. It's probably in the book here. Okay, these are 100s. I'm going to find them. Here is, no, these are all 112s. I'm going to find it. Oh God. Where are my rosters? Of course I just
Okay.
grabbed everything.
We're not gonna worry about it.
Not worry about it?
I'll go look it up online. It's fine.
Online, okay. You can find it.
There's multiple people at the same day.
This is Thursday group. Okay. All right, sorry. Where was I? Okay. Sorry about, you can restart again. Okay. Melatonin is derived from the amino acid tryptophan. An intermediary, so there's only like 3 biochemical reactions going from tryptophan to serotonin to melatonin. So wherever in the body there's a need for serotonin, like in the brain or in the intestine, it's going to be broken down to melatonin, and there melatonin is going to have its own effect. This is happening mostly in the pineal, but also in the retina and in the intestine. Tryptophan is an amino acid, so it's a small molecule. And melatonin is electrically neutral, which means it can enter the cells and act on nuclear receptors, but it can also act via surface receptors. So surface receptors are one way, and nuclear receptors are the other way to have melatonin act on the cell. Yes?
Can you tell me those two names for the laughing gas?
The what?
Laughing gas, the names you said you don't want us to get mixed up on?
Nitric and nitrous oxide. Nitric oxide is a messenger in the body, and nitrous oxide is laughing gas. All right. Remember the three glands in the male reproductive system: the seminal vesicle, the prostate, and bulbourethral gland, and that little experiment that we can do. So from there you remember probably that the secretions of the seminal gland are sweet, of the prostate are milky because it's made of protein, and of the bulbourethral glands are salty because of salts that act as soaps and detergents cleaning up the urethra. Okay, synaptic signaling is a case of paracrine signaling, a special case of paracrine signaling because it's one cell acting chemically onto the next cell, the neighboring cell, without going through the bloodstream, but at a very short distance. Okay, when the egg is fertilized in the oviduct, it travels into the uterus and embeds itself into the wall of the uterus. At that point, the uterus is going to send a chemical signal to the yellow body to continue secreting progesterone. So yellow body is the leftovers of the follicle that burst, that ovulated, and it transforms into an endocrine gland that secretes progesterone. And it will do it for several days. And then, if there's no signal that there is pregnancy, it's going to stop doing that. It's going to start kind of breaking down. It'll stop producing progesterone. It's going to break down and turn into the white body, the corpus albicans, which we saw in the lab practical earlier today as well. You saw both the yellow body and the white body were the questions there. So you need that signal for it to continue progesterone secretion for the next 9 months to preserve the pregnancy, to not allow the uterus to shed off with all the blood and stuff. Okay, there are several hormones that act on the mammary gland. There's estrogen, which is involved in the original development of the mammary gland. There is progesterone, which acts on the enlargement of the mammary glands, first initially during puberty and then at each pregnancy. The mammary glands get bigger, the breasts get bigger during pregnancy. Prolactin stimulates the mammary gland to actually produce milk and store it in there. And oxytocin is triggered by the baby suckling and is stimulating the ejection of milk. Thank you. Bye. All right. Okay, so those are the 4 hormones that act on the mammary gland. Okay. Let's see. Thyroid hormones, they regulate body temperature. How? By opening pores in the membranes of the mitochondria. So those mitochondrial membranes become leaky, so the mitochondria, the motor, the engine of mitochondria becomes less efficient, so it's not breaking down glucose or pyruvate as efficiently, so a lot of those chemical bonds, when they're broken apart, instead of that energy being placed into formation of ATP, it just gets released in heat. So that's how thyroid increases the body temperature. And so in mammals and birds, it is going to keep them warm-blooded. All right, you know that urethra passes through the soft corpus spongiosum, while the two corpora cavernosa provide stiffness when they're full of blood. You've seen the slide of that today, didn't you? The star-shaped thing in the middle of the slide of penis was urethra, right? And so it was corpus spongiosum there that it was in the middle of. And then kind of left on the bottom, you see two corpora cavernosa on that slide. But they look small because they're empty, right? When they're filled with blood, they get much bigger. All right. Triiodothyronine has 3 iodines, and thyroxine, or 4-iodothyronine, has 4 iodine ions attached to the hormone. GnRH is made in the hypothalamus. It's one of those releasing hormones that gets transported by hypothalamo-hypophyseal portal system into the anterior pituitary to stimulate the secretion of LH and FSH. GnRH, in order to get the maximum effect, has to be secreted in a pulsatile manner. So you have a pulse of GnRH every 30 to 60 minutes. That's going to result in the maximal release of LH and FSH. If you have it too frequently, like every 5 minutes, bum, 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 that's going to actually have an inhibitory effect. And if you have it too slow, it's happening every 3 hours, then it's not going to be very stimulatory, right? So you want a pulsatile release of GnRH in order to get a maximum release of LH and FSH. All right, diabetes mellitus requires injections of what as a replacement hormone? Insulin. How about diabetes insipidus? What would you inject that person with? What is it lacking? Antidiuretic hormone, ADH or vasopressin, is the replacement hormone. That's the one that's missing in diabetes insipidus.
So, is diabetes insipidus type 2 diabetes?
Hmm?
Is it type 2 diabetes?
Those are completely different diseases. Diabetes insipidus has nothing to do with glucose. It's just water control. And if you have it, you're peeing gallons a day. And you can live if you can drink gallons a day, which is not much of a living, right? It's really, and if you live in the middle of a desert, it's kind of difficult to get water, right? So it's much better to get injections or implant of ADH. Okay. What is aldosterone chemically? Is it a amine derivative? Is it a small peptide, a large protein, or a steroid? Huh?
Large protein.
Aldosterone.
It's a
Steroid.
steroid, right?
Yeah, aldosterone.
Steroid.
Testosterone, estrogen or estradiol, progesterone, those are all steroids. So they're little fatty molecules that easily pass through the membranes, and thus they're going to act on nuclear receptors. What about growth hormone? What is it chemically? What is it chemically? Anybody knows? Growth hormone?
Prolactin.
It triggers milk injection from the mammary gland.
Growth hormone. What is growth hormone chemically?
Is it prolactin? I don't know.
Peptide, protein, steroids, amine, what is it?
Steroids?
No, it's not steroid.
It's a humongous protein. It's a huge, huge protein. How about prolactin? Also protein, but not so big. How about oxytocin and vasopressin. The small peptides, 8 or 9 amino acids. So you need to know these guys, who is who. All right. Is there a correlation between the size of breasts and the amount of milk produced?
No.
No, that's correct. Completely unrelated. It's mostly fat anyway. So no relation. Olfactory receptors. What kind of receptors are they? Anybody knows? Huh? Smell receptors, olfactory receptors. What type of receptor are they?
A chemoreceptor?
No, like nuclear, cytoplasmatic, membrane. What type of membrane receptor?
G protein.
Aha! Cellular transmembrane, G protein, membrane receptors. And apart from the nasal cavity, where else in the body do we find the smell or olfactory receptors? In an unusual place.
Like intestines?
You're getting there.
Liver.
The pancreas?
No. The head of the sperm cells. They smell their way towards the egg. They need to know which way to swim, so they don't swim out, right? So they're swimming up towards the egg by smelling the more and more concentrated smell of whatever the ovary and oviduct there are secreting. Okay, lovely. How does the growth hormone act on the cell? So it's a huge protein, so what kind of receptor is it going to use? Can it enter the cell? To use like a nuclear receptor. Can a big protein enter a cell? Can it go through the membrane? What is the membrane made of?
Lipids.
Huh? Lipid. Water and oil don't mix, right? So you can go oily stuff, fatty stuff through the fat, right? But proteins are going to be polar, and they're going to love the water, and they're not going to be going through the membrane, right? So they have to act via surface receptors. What is growth? It's cell division, right? Growth hormone is going to tell all the cells in the body to divide, or most of them, to divide 1 into 2. And so the way it works is not directly growth hormone telling the cell to divide. Growth hormone attaches to the surface receptor, and that tells the cell to produce a small peptide hormone of its own called IGF. There are several classes of IGFs. IGF-1, for instance. Those are insulin-like growth factors. And it's going to secrete it out of the cell into the intracellular space, where that IGF is going to act on the surface receptors of that same cell. That is going to trigger the cell division. It's complicated, right? Growth hormone tells the cell to secrete IGFs. IGFs are secreted and go and act on the same cell. This is autocrine regulation, telling it to divide. That's how growth works. All right, what happens to the bodybuilders when they inject testosterone or other anabolic steroids?
Their body stops producing it.
Their body stops producing it. And where does the body produce testosterone normally? What kinds of cells in which organ are producing testosterone in a normal, human male, right?
Muscles?
Huh?
In the muscles?
The testes.
In the testes. And those are Leydig cells, or interstitial cells of the testes, that are producing testosterone. And remember, there is such a thing as a testes-blood barrier. So if you're injecting testosterone into the bloodstream, or eating it and it gets into the bloodstream, it's going to tell hypothalamus to shut down GnRH. And it's going to tell the pituitary to shut down LH and FSH, which is going to tell the testes to shut down the production of testosterone. But testosterone from the blood cannot enter the testes. So suddenly there's no you're full of testosterone, you're bulking up the muscles and everything, but there's no testosterone in the testis itself. And testosterone is necessary in the testis, first, to stimulate production of sperm. So if you're doing this for months, you're going to become infertile. And second, testosterone is involved in maintenance of the reproductive system. The testes, the epididymis, vas deferens, penis, everything. So all of that is going to start shrinking. You're bulking up here, you're shrinking elsewhere, right? Not probably what the guys want to happen, but that's what's going to happen. So that is using your understanding of positive feedback loops to understand what happens when you are injecting testosterone into your body. It's going to shut down the native production of testosterone, which is going to have big local effects. You need to know the hormones of the anterior pituitary. There's 6 of them. The hormones of the posterior pituitary. There's 2 of them, oxytocin and vasopressin, or ADH. And the hormone of the pars intermedia. There's a tiny little space between the anterior and posterior pituitary, which secretes only one hormone, and that is MSH, which is a melanin-stimulating hormone. That hormone is usually stimulated when you're exposing yourself to the sun, and it's going to tell the melanocytes in the skin to start producing more melanin, so you tan. And that is pars intermedia, a little tiny sliver of tissue just between the anterior and posterior pituitary. All right. You know that ovulation, copulation, parturition, and lactation are 4 examples of the positive feedback loops. And those are the positive feedback loops that are involving both the reproductive and the endocrine systems. So for this exam, we don't care much about blood clotting or, the positive feedback loops, action potential or something like that. So just those 4 are interesting for this exam. I have no idea what time it is either.
10:18.
We still have some time, right? Okay, good. Okay. You need to know the development of the reproductive system. So our default is female. So if nothing happens, if there's no special signal, the embryo of most mammals, including humans, is going to develop into a female. In order to divert the development into male, you need a Y chromosome. Well, more specifically, you need a gene called SRY, which in most people is on the Y chromosome. There are examples, and that's where it all gets weird, where SRY migrates to an X chromosome or an autosome, and so you can be chromosomally female and yet develop into a male, right? Because there's an SRY. But that's a very, very rare occurrence. In most males, SRY is found only on the Y chromosome. And you can have Y chromosome only if you're chromosomally male, right? You get X from the egg, from mom, and you get either X or Y from the dad, depending on which sperm has fertilized it. And so, if you get Y, you're going to get the gene SRY. SRY is a transcription factor. What does it mean? It's a protein that binds elsewhere on different, promoters of different genes in a genome, turning on other genes. And those genes are then going to result in various changes in the development, early development, diverting it from female to male. So the first thing it's going to do is take the tissue that is primordial ovary, and it's going to transform it into a primordial testis. The testis is then going to start developing and is going to start secreting testosterone. And so a lot of things are going to be changing because there's testosterone. For those couple of days, that little blip of testosterone in the early embryo is going to have effects. And so some of the tissues are going to be transformed from a female to the male. Like ovary gets transformed into the testes. But also under the influence of testosterone now, things like glans clitoris becomes glans penis under the influence of testosterone. But because of this whole change of, SRY turning on a whole bunch of genes, there's going to be not just transformation, but also replacement. There are two tubules in the early embryo, Mullerian duct and Wolffian duct. And Mullerian duct is the default, right? And so if there's no stimulus, there's no SRY, there's no signal, Mullerian duct is going to develop into the tubing of the female tract, the vagina and uterus and oviducts. While Wolffian duct is going to be reabsorbed. It's not going to exist anymore. But if there's SRY and it triggers all these other genes to turn on, those genes, products of those genes are going to turn off the development of the Mullerian duct, which is then going to be reabsorbed, and is going to trigger the development of the Wolffian duct, which is going to develop into the tubing of the male reproductive system, so the epididymis, vas deferens, and urethra. You have not one tissue transforming into another, you have one tissue being shut down and another tissue developing instead. So you need to know how all of that works. You need what is a gonad, you know what's a gonad and what's a gamete, what those things mean. What is the male gonad?
Testes.
Male gonad is testes. What is the female gonad? Ovary, right? What is the male gamete? Sperm cell, that's right, spermatozoid. What is the female gamete? Ova, egg, right? Okay. Only one follicle each month is going to get ovulated. So, there's a lot of primordial follicles, and a few of them are going to be recruited every month, and they're going to go from primordial to primary to secondary to tertiary. And you're going to have several tertiaries in the end, and they're going to compete. And only one is going to win. And which one is going to win and actually ovulate the egg depends on the several factors that combine. One is the size of the follicle, bigger the better. Second is the number of theca and granulosa cells, more the better. And then the number of FSH receptors on those cells, more the better. You have those three factors, you get the winner. Everybody else gets reabsorbed by the ovarian tissue and doesn't get ovulated. Ovulation itself is the process of explosive release of the egg out of that follicle under the pressure. The follicle is making more and more and more liquid, so there's more and more and more pressure until, under the influence of LH, big LH surge from the pituitary, is going to burst. And that egg is then going to be released out of the ovary, out of that follicle, and hopefully will be captured by the freely moving oviduct. At that point of ovulation, the levels of estrogen are really, really high, and that estrogen is going to stimulate the oviduct to move around, the fimbria to move around, and the villi inside are going to move around and start moving the liquid. So it's actually going to have a sucking effect on the liquid. So if there's an egg there, it's going to be sucked in with all that liquid and then moved in. So oviduct is very active under the influence of estrogen during the time of ovulation. Okay, what is the collective term, one term that encompasses the labia majora, labia minora, mons pubis, clitoris, hymen, and Bartholin's glands? All of those things you can call by one name. So those are kind of external parts of the reproductive system of women, of female tract, right? So what is one word for it, for all of that external stuff?
Vulva.
Huh?
Vulva.
There you go, vulva, that's right. So all of those parts are parts of vulva. Okay. In order for fertilization to happen, both the egg and the sperm need to have a layer of kind of a mixture of proteins, peptides, and carbohydrates that are covering them. What is covering the egg cell is called zona pellucida. What is covering the head of the sperm cell is called acrosome. You have to have zona pellucida in the right place, in the right composition, and acrosome in the right position and right composition in order for fertilization to happen. If you have a sperm of the wrong species, it's not going to have the right composition in the acrosome, and the fertilization is not going to happen. And so a chemical reaction between acrosome and zona pellucida is going to allow one sperm cell to enter, and then zona pellucida completely changes its structure, not allowing any more sperm cells to enter. So you get only one sperm in, and although there's hundreds of others are on there trying to get in, suddenly they're blocked. Because there's a very, very fast chemical reaction that changes the structure of zona pellucida. Okay. All right. What is norepinephrine chemically? Does anybody know? Steroid, protein, little peptide, or a derivative of an amine? Derivative of an amino acid would be an amine, right? Norepinephrine. Norepinephrine is a very small molecule. It's an amine, so it's a derivative of an amino acid. And it is polar, right? It has polarity. It's not electroneutral, which means it has to act on a membrane receptor. It cannot enter the cell, because polar stuff cannot go through fat. Polar stuff likes water. And things that like water cannot go through things that like fat. Fat likes fat. Okay, what is thyroxine? Thyroxine and melatonin are also derivatives of amino acids, but they're electroneutral. So they can, because they're tiny, they can enter the cell through the membrane because there's no polarity. They're neutral molecules and they can enter, and they're going to use nuclear receptors. Melatonin nuclear receptors are floating in and out of the nucleus and cytoplasm, between the nucleus and cytoplasm, and melatonin is going to bind it wherever it finds it. The thyroxine receptors are already bound to the promoters of a bunch of genes in the genome. So the thyroxine has to go all the way into the nucleus and find its receptor already there. And whenever the receptor and the hormone bind, that's going to activate the genes. That's why these kind of hormones act slowly, right? It takes some time for all of this to happen. So all protein hormones, all peptide hormones, and some of the amine, those that are polar, have to use membrane receptors. The non-polar amines and steroid hormones can enter the cell and use nuclear or cytoplasmatic receptors. Okay. You already know everything about melanopsin and melatonin. Okay, which cells produce estrogen? Do you know? What are the names? I mentioned those cells a few minutes ago. They are in the ovary, they are in the follicle, and they're called theca and granulosa cells. Both of them secrete estrogen. What are the names of the cells that produce testosterone? Again, I mentioned it a few minutes ago.
Sex cells. Sex cells.
They are in the testes. What are the name of the cells that produce testosterone?
Spectre, right?
Leydig cells. Leydig cells. Okay. There are also Sertoli cells there, but they are nursing and nurturing cells for this, early sperm. Leydig cells secrete testosterone. What is what is the layer of the adrenal cortex that also secretes sex hormones like estrogen and testosterone? You need to know those three layers, right? One layer secretes aldosterone, one layer secretes cortisol, and one layer secretes small amounts of sex hormones, even in women. The only only source of testosterone in women, is the zona reticularis of the adrenal cortex. Where is progesterone secreted? Again,
Medulla.
corpus luteum, yellow body. That's the endocrine gland in the ovary that produces progesterone. Which cells produce